Rock rats. My dad wasn't at the airline counter when I got to the airport. Our flight wasn't scheduled to take off for another 3 hours, so I wasn't worried, yet. I went into the restroom and discovered Mom had filled my backpack with all the clothes that she liked, not necessarily my favorites, but they were better than the suit, which I stuffed into a garbage can. It was too small for me anyway. 2 hours and 55 minutes to go. Waiting at an airport might be the worst. Well, except for waiting in jail. I bought an evil-looking hot dog and wolfed it down with a flat soda. 2 hours and 53 minutes. I went through my backpack and found the 2 moleskines, and I thought about starting my assignment. All I had to do was fill one of them, but at that point, I had no idea what I was going to write about. I found an automatic pencil in the airport store, but when I sat down and pulled the wrapping off, the eraser shot off into space, and I couldn't find it. I wrote Moleskine 1 on the first page, and put the pencil and the moleskine away. Discouraging. 2 hours and 37 minutes. As I sat there watching everyone coming and going, it finally dawned on me that I was free, that this got me thinking about what had led up to this. And I don't mean climbing skyscrapers or getting arrested or the trial. I mean way back before I was born. I was conceived in a 2-man tent under the shadow of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. At least that's when my mom thinks it happened. My parents were 24 years old at the time. The day before the tent, they had reached the summit of El Cap along with the Iron Hawk route in record time of 32 hours, 43 minutes. And this is not the only climbing record that they had broken that year. Hallucinogen Wall, Body Wax, the Flingus Cling, and dozens of other records had fallen to the climbing team of Terry Marcello and Joshua Wood. Climbing magazines and equipment companies had started to pay attention to them, and to pay them money. The rusty old van that they had lived in for 3 years was ditched for a brand new 4-wheel drive truck camper. No more temp jobs to scrape together money for gas and food, no more mooching off weekend climbers. They bought a piece of property in Wyoming and built a log cabin in front of a 90-foot vertical wall, perfect for conditioning climbs. The Rock Rats were on their way up. I'd seen photos of them back then. My father looked like a bodybuilder, and he was as flexible as a gymnast. My favorite photo of him was where he was standing on the high ledge, touching his knees with his nose. My mother was a foot shorter than my father. She was lean with dreadlocks tickling her powerful shoulders, muscles in her arms and legs like knotted ropes, and abs like speed bumps. She was bulletproof, but she was not baby-proof. 2 months after El Cap, she told my father that she was pregnant. I have no idea what his reaction was, but I doubt he jumped up and down for joy when he got the good news. It was a different pregnancy. There were complications. She was told to stay in bed or she would lose me, but my father was on the move, teaching seminars, endorsing equipment, and climbing, shattering records on Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount McKinley, and Annapurna, which is where he was the night I was born. He called her from base camp on a satellite phone after reaching the summit. "What do you want to name him?" Mom asked. "Peak." "Pete?" "No, Peak. P-E-A-K, like Mountain Peak." He didn't lay eyes on me until I was 3 months old, and that's when my mother had her accident in the backyard. I was there, strapped into a car seat at the base of the wall. And at that age, probably staring at prairie dogs popping out of their holes, only dimly aware that I had parents at all. They were 30 feet up the wall, free climbing. For rock rats like them, this was like strolling across a level parking lot. Mom had reached up and grabbed a handful of rotten rock. It was still clutched in her hand when my dad got down to her, which was probably 5 seconds after she hit the ground. 30 feet, shattered hip, broken back. My dad canceled all seminars and climbs, everything, staying right by her side through the whole orthopedic jigsaw puzzle. It took nearly a year to put her back together, wheelchair, crutches, and finally, when she was able to hobble around with a cane, Dad left again, showing up a couple times a year for a day or 2 at a time. It took Mom 2 more years of physical therapy to ditch the cane, but she never climbed again. Dad took me climbing for the first time when I was 5 years old. We tried to keep it a secret, but the fly rods and fishing gear didn't fool Mom for 1 minute. Only 4 more climbs with him over the next 2 years. But in between, I made hundreds of solo ascents on the wall in the back of the cabin, with Mom manning the belay rope, shouting instructions up to me. Then Rolf showed up on our doorstep, the New York lawyer, in shining armor. He and Mom had actually grown up together in Nebraska, neighbors. Rolf had been smitten with her since they were 8 years old. After high school, Mom hit the road to climb rocks. Rolf went to Harvard to study law. He arrived at the cabin at the night in the middle of a blizzard. We were sitting in front of the wood stove reading. We didn't have a television back then. There was a knock on the door. Actually, more like a desperate banging, jolting both of us from our books. Our cabin was 16 miles from the nearest town. People didn't drop by at 10 o'clock at night, except for Dad, who never announced his arrivals, or wouldn't even think about knocking. Mom opened the front door, and there stood Rolf, although she didn't recognize him at first. He wasn't dressed for a Wyoming winter, had on a light jacket, khaki pants, and tennis shoes. He was trying to control it, but his teeth were chattering. There was a quiver in his voice, which could have been from the cold, but I think it was more from fear. It had been over 10 years since he had seen my mother. "Hi, Terry," he said. "Rolf?" "Yeah, my rental car kind of slid off the road a mile back or so. I would have called, but you're not listed. We use a cell phone out here. Just as... Well, never mind that." She pulled him inside and made him a cup of hot chocolate and gave him some of my dad's clothes, which were too big for him. I went to bed, so I did not know what happened that first night, but he became a regular guest at the cabin for the next several months, flying in for long weekends whenever he could. Rolf made my mom laugh, and I liked him for that. But aside from what we didn't have as much in common, I guess I resented him for horning in on the simple life that we had made in the wilderness. He took us to New York, which was interesting, but noisy and confusing compared to the prairie. And at the end of our 2-week stay, they sat me down in Rolf's kitchen and told me that they were going to get married. "Okay," I said, not really knowing what that meant at the time. I later learned that it meant that we were selling the cabin in Wyoming and moving to a loft in New York. It meant that my real dad would no longer be popping in for visits. It meant the Green Street School. It meant that the closest thing I was going to get to a rock wall for the next few years was a 15-footer at the YMCA down the street, which I could have climbed backward without protection if the guy manning the ropes would have allowed it. None of this helped to sweeten my relationship with Rolf. The twins saved me, and it also helped that my mom let me subscribe to half a dozen climbing magazines. In the back of one of those magazines, I discovered summer climbing trips. It took a lot of sulking to get her to let me go to one of them. What cinched it in the end was that she knew the climbing instructor, a former rock rat gone legit. After this, as long as I did well in school, she let me sign up for more camps. Then the time lag between the climbs became a problem. I started eyeing skyscrapers, telling myself that I would just plan the route up but not climb it. Right. To get up a rock, you study the outside, trying to pick the best footholds and handholds, guessing where you're going to encounter problems so that you have the right equipment with you to get around them. To climb a skyscraper, you have to know the inside as well as the outside, which is where I screwed up on my last climb. You don't want to be dangling outside a window when someone is at a desk working or vacuuming the floor. You also have to plan your exits. Mine were pretty simple. I used the elevators. Rooftops have doors. Late on the day of the climb, while the building was still open, I'd go up to the roof and put a piece of duct tape over the latch. After I climbed the top, I'd slip through the stairwell and spend the night. And in the morning, when the building started to fill up with workers, I'd walk down a few floors, get on an elevator, punch the lobby button, and walk out as if I just finished an early dentist or doctor's appointment, getting home before Mom, Rolf, or the twins knew I was gone. I guess my plan didn't quite work out at the Woolworth building.